This screen I'm sharing, again, it has the multicolored squares at the top, and on the right-hand side is a picture of Scott Artley. It's a black and white photo. He's on a black background, dark background. He's wearing a button-up, checkered shirt with a baseball cap, and he's looking off to the right, or your left, and smiling as if there's an inside joke going on. So he has over 10 years of professional and volunteer experience in the Twin Cities arts and cultural sector. Scott Artley, who uses the pronouns he, him, his, they, them, and their, is a Metropolitan Regional Arts Councils, and they go by MRAC in case he uses that reference. Their first accessibility program director. In this role, in addition to the work on grant programs, he develops resources targeted to artists with disabilities and organizations serving artists and audiences with disabilities. And he coordinates efforts to ensure MRAC's own grant process, public meetings, trainings, and other activities so they're accessible to participants of all abilities. So I'll stop sharing and welcome Scott. I know you have a tight schedule. It's interesting that you and I kind of have the same role, but you have 10 years on me. So again, give us a quick audio description, you know the drill, and fill in any information I may have forgotten, and go for it. Thanks for coming.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for having me. Hi, I'm Scott Artley. As Ria said, I use he, him, his pronouns, but they, them, theirs also feels really good to me. I'm a white, masculine presenting person with a buzzed, bald head. I have a tight orange beard and rectangular glasses. Today, I'm wearing my new favorite 1980s cardigan. It's making its premiere today, which is very exciting. I got it a couple weekends ago at one of my favorite retro shops. So I also have, you might see, I like to talk with my hands a lot, so you might see my green, shiny green painted fingernails. I love painting my fingernails. So as Ria said, I'm the Accessibility Program Director at the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council. The Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, or MRAC, is one of 11 regional arts councils that funds arts and the arts organizations and individual artists in the Twin Cities metropolitan region. I was hired in 2019, got sort of a dream job after spending 10 plus years working in various jobs in the arts, which I will tell you about in a moment, but really was quite a dream job to get there. And I hope that there are more organizations that develop positions like this, because I think it is so critical for where we need to go as a field. So I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my journey into access and disability. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how I conceive of accessibility, my sort of like philosophy of, and then I'm gonna tell you about some projects. Thanks again for accommodating my schedule. This is weirdly, today was a day where I got invited to participate in 2 conferences, one of which is in person. You know, after so long of not participating in conferences, here we are. They just happened on the same day. It must be a really popular day. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about my journey into access and disability. So I like to say that my relationship to work in arts access is intertwined with my own personal experiences with disability. So I also identify as queer and disabled, and my queerness is generally pretty apparent right away. He flashes his green fingernails. But my disabilities aren't. And I don't actually always share my disabilities. Nobody really owes you any information about their disabilities, but I wanted to share with you today because I think it is important to make some of those things more explicit. Some folks call them invisible disabilities, and I actually say my disabilities are visible if you're really paying attention. So I am a brittle type 1 diabetic, which means that I have a lot of trouble for various reasons staying in good control of my blood sugar, and I am insulin dependent. I also have a type of autoimmune arthritis, which puts me in chronic pain. And I have a big old bucket of mental health challenges that have been pretty severely affecting my life since I was a kid. Most recently, I actually acquired long COVID, something that you might hear about more and more As someone who's immune compromised, I did my best to stay out of it for as long as I could, but did eventually get caught by the virus. And now, several months after having the illness, I have fatigue and what's called reduced cognitive endurance, which means that I basically have trouble thinking for long periods of time. I have trouble speaking, which sucks because I speak a lot. I like to talk and I like to do things like this. So I will say it's drastically changed my life. All of my disabilities have been really challenging. And also, I want to say that I'm grateful for all the ways that my disabilities have taught me about myself and about the world. So in some ways, although sometimes it hurts to say it, I do think disability can be a gift. Throughout all of my life, art and art making have been critical components to my survival. And I can say truly that art saved my life on many occasions. Here I am getting emotional about it, but say it every time and it's true. And so that impacted me personally, and it really set me on a path to make sure that art was something that everyone had access to. I had a series of jobs at theaters, the local big modern art museum, and then a range of small arts organizations, eventually becoming an independent consultant. So I started doing accessibility work because it was sort of lobbed onto my regular job. That I was working for Mixed Blood Theater in Minneapolis, and somebody quit, and all of a sudden I was in charge of audience services, and all of a sudden that also meant I had to do all the accessibility stuff. And this is maybe a story that is, something that several of you are feeling. Maybe this is something sort of tacked onto your job. And it's not something you get a whole lot of training in, which is why it's so amazing that a conference like this is happening today. So it was my journey into accessibility has really been self-taught. I'm just such a big nerd, and I love learning stuff, and I love teaching it back to people. So through all of this work, though, through small theaters, large institutions, the through line of my career in the arts has been using art to create and nurture belonging. I know all of you here today are probably doing the same thing, which is why you're here. So let's talk about my work at MRAC. So I encounter many groups that want to do disability inclusion right. And I'm so excited when folks say that they want to do this work better, and I'm always just like so happy to talk about it with them. And what I've noticed is so often people move right into setting up access services. So translating written materials into Braille, hiring ASL interpreters, shout out to ASL interpreters today. But those are really tactical elements. And I wanna instead, as you enter into this work, I want you to think about accessibility, not as a series of tactics, but as a mindset. There's a few concepts that I want to talk about. One is access thinking, which is considering the breadth of human difference in everyday choices. So access thinking, considering the breadth of human differences in everyday choices. And then that's what you can do individually. And then I want you to think about doing that work in an organizational concept, or with collaborators, or with audiences. Could be developing a culture of access. So doing access thinking together. So I said that's sort of a mindset. And I even want to sort of like zoom out a little bit more and think about access work as an act of imagination. And I want you to think about that on a couple levels. So first, imagining people with disabilities as a part of the world. And that's obvious, right? But I think people with disabilities have historically been isolated from the world. Therefore, the world is full of barriers for people with disabilities because we've inherited a world that can't imagine people with disabilities participating. So for example, the US Capitol wasn't built with accessible entrances because no one thought that people with disabilities would be in Congress. So on March 12th, 1990, more than 60 activists abandoned their crutches, wheelchairs, power chairs, other mobility assistance devices, and began crawling up those 83 stone steps that led to the Capitol. This is called the Capitol Crawl. And this was a critical moment of visibility for people with disabilities. It represents a radical act of imagination that people with disabilities can and will participate. So that's the first sort of layer of accessibility as an act of imagination. The second is that it is a radical act of imagination to figure out how to make that participation possible. It takes empathy, curiosity, humility, and creativity, which I know all of you people are great at. So I wanted to highlight some projects I've encountered in my work that showcase the accessible imagination at work. So the first is art shanty projects. I'm just slowing down so the ASL interpreter can catch up. Art shanty projects, or ASP, is what I sort of say it's a quintessentially Minnesotan project. Are you ready for this? It is a project in the middle of winter. It has interactive ice fishing houses on the ice in the middle of a lake. Tell me you're Minnesotan without telling me you're Minnesotan, right? So what I think is so cool is like, here's already something so weird and like what an act of imagination to begin with. And they've thought so deeply about how to get people with disabilities to participate in this work. So they have accessible parking. They even take over quote unquote regular parking spaces. I'm using scare quotes here. And they designate them accessible parking. Is it legal? I don't know, but I'm glad they're doing it. They also have a ramp onto the ice. They use kick sleds to get people to the center of the lake where the ice houses are. And then once they get there, they have ASL interpretation and audio description services available in the warming shanty as people need them by request. They get one person to walk around with them and interpret. The next project I want to talk about is I learned about as part of the Leadership Exchange in Arts and Disability conference that Rhea and I were at in August. This came out of the North Carolina Department of Cultural and Natural Resources. And they have a battleship, North Carolina, which used ramps to make the main deck accessible to visitors with mobility disabilities. But there's still a lot of access to other parts of the ship that were open to visitors, but were only accessible via stairs and ladders. They have what they call the back porch tour. So homey, so welcoming. It's designed for groups with limited mobility that gives them a taste of coming aboard through a 10-minute video, a tour of the visitor center, and a visit to the observation deck. The third and last project I will give you is from Cow Tipping Press. It's a local Minneapolis-based organization. I have such a professional crush on this organization, and you'll understand why in a moment. The Cow Tipping Press teaches inclusive writing classes for adults with developmental disabilities, which they say is a radical chance to, they say it's a radical chance for people with developmental disabilities to speak for themselves in a medium that is usually used to speak about and for them. They use what they call an exact word approach, which means that they don't try to correct what some might consider mistakes or try to fill in the gaps of what they think the writer is trying to say, but instead they consider the differences in communication approaches to be valid and often beautiful experiments that teach us something new about what language can do. So those are three projects that I think are demonstrating the accessible imagination Thank you so much for letting me share a little bit about my philosophy and more importantly, my new cardigan. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, thank you for coming. I know, yeah, when I first contacted you, you're like, oh my goodness, I just had someone else ask me for the 13th as well. So I'm glad you could fit us in for a little bit of time. Yeah, I strive to grow up to be like you one day. So thank you for being a great example and helping me push myself as well. Anybody have any questions for Scott before he has to leave us? He's got like 3 minutes.
I just wanted to say, this is Blind Joe Scott. Wonderful presentation, man. And I'm sorry I can't see that beautiful cardigan, brother. Keep rocking it, dude.
I'll describe that it's gray and white and blue and red, and it is a Cosby sweater. We're not supposed to say that anymore. It is a radical fun sweater with lots of weird patterns.
Love it, dude.
Yeah.
Keep doing you, brother. Right on.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Okay, let's see. Any questions? I don't see too much in the chat. So I suppose, yeah, I'll let you go. But thank you for coming, Scott, and good luck at your next presentation.
I do have a very, very quick question. So your work at MRAC, which is based in Minneapolis, do the policies then extend across all of the regions of Minnesota to the other regional arts councils?
When you say policies, can you tell me what you mean by that?
On the accessibility and the philosophies and the welcoming of accessibility into programs.
Sure. Yeah, that's so each of those 11 regional arts councils are separate. We're all nonprofit organizations. So we distribute public arts dollars, but are separate 501c3s. And so we each have a lot of autonomy. That's the strength of this system, I think, is that it's a grassroots way to get these public art dollars into communities in a responsive way. I've been hired as an independent consultant outside of the scope of my work at MRAC to consult with some of those other regional arts councils. But there's been talk about trainings and ways to sort of bring that work together for everyone. But my scope is really within the Twin Cities Metro. But I hope that it inspires some additional work elsewhere.
Awesome. All right. Yes, I hate to keep you. I know you said you have to get going and go drive to an actual in-person conference. So we're doing something like that in Bismarck here in a couple weeks. So I'm excited to see everybody at that time too. So, but again, thank you, and reach out to me if you ever need anything, Scott.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.